Hey, welcome back. This is Eli from Mobox. So recently, Mike and I got in contact with Nvidia to try out their newest series of RTX cards, and that means that I'm currently running a 3090 in my computer, which is insane. So obviously, after playing some games, the next thing I wanted to try out is seeing how it performs in Cinema 4D combined with Octane. So I just dived in Cinema 4D and tried some random stuff. It's a good example to try out the performance of the card because we have a lot of subsurface scattering, and that combined with all the lights and the emission that is being cast, that creates a lot of noise, even to the point where it gets a bit difficult in the live viewer because it gets so slow that you can't preview what you're working on unless you want to wait a few minutes every time you adjust something. But it has been a pleasure working with this card, so that enabled me to make this artwork. So I'm going to show you how to create this even with a slower card. So for the first part, we're just going to focus on the model. We don't even need Octane for now. One last thing I need to mention before we get started is that you need Cinema 4D R20 or above to follow this tutorial. So let's get started with a simple sphere. The defaults should be fine. If you are using R20, you probably have more segments, so I would just lower it to 16. Now we can build a volume builder and a volume mesher. Also, if you're in an older version, it may look a bit different up here, but all the features are inside of the button somewhere around here. So just search for it. We're going to put the builder inside of the mesher, and actually we can also put the sphere inside of it already. But we're also going to create a shader field. In my case, this is under this menu. For the older versions, you will have to go to create, and it will be somewhere in here. So for me, it's up here, shader field, and I'm going to drag this under the sphere, so the second child of the volume builder. Of course, this is not doing anything at all right now, because we need to be in this field and set the shader to be a noise in this case. And you could pick anything you want, but what I went with is an electric noise. So maybe it's a good idea to disable the sphere for now, so you can see what is actually happening. So this gives us some random blobs that are floating around, but we're going to redefine this a bit because it's not enough right now. So we can do that by going to the bottom settings of this noise. We can set the scale to be a bit smaller, maybe 75, but that makes it even worse, so we also need to compensate with some of these settings down here. So maybe we can just go with a bit of an additional brightness, so maybe 12%, and you can see that gives us a huge difference. But in order to get a better idea of how this looks, we can also go to the volume builder, its settings. And the voxel size right now is set at 10 centimeters, which is quite large for this kind of size of project. So we're going to lower this to 4 centimeters. So you can see that instantly changes everything. So now we have the detail we kind of want. Let's enable the sphere again. And in here, under the volume builder, we're going to make sure the sphere is at the top. And we're going to set the mode to intersect. That means that everything around this sphere will get cut off and we only keep the intersecting shapes. So now if you zoom in, you can see it is still a bit rough, especially around the edges, which is not what we want, of course. Luckily there are some features to fix that. For example, the SDF smooth or just smoothing on the older versions. So just click that. But we're going to put this in between the sphere and the shader field, like this. So that only smooths the shader below it right now. We're going to set the operator, which means which kind of noise we're using, and we're going to set this to mean curvature. So that follows the original shapes a bit more than the Gaussian one. Okay, so that's the smoothing for the shader, but we also need some additional smoothing for the end result. So above the sphere, we can create another one, which can remain the Gaussian one because this is really smooth, but of course we need to decrease this a lot. So let's go with something like 9 or 10%. So that makes it just a bit smoother. But we will go a step further to fix this even more. But first let's go to this volume mesher, and we can play with this top slider, the voxel range threshold. And you can see that kind of defines how much of the sphere is being eroded or melting. So let's go with something like 40%. Okay, so this is still not smooth, but a little trick you can use, but which is also kind of heavy, is putting this inside of another volume builder. So I recommend saving your file first if you haven't already, but let's try this out. So you can even hold Alt while clicking on this volume builder, so that makes it the parent, And we're going to do the same thing but with the volume measure. So we have a large blob right now. This is not what we wanted. So we need to go in the volume builder again. And this time we're going to do the thing that may slow down your PC, so make sure you've saved the file. But we're going to set the voxel size to 1 centimeter. So for me that is no problem. I hope it worked out fine for you as well. And we're also going to add one more smoothing layer on top of this. So like this, the Gaussian one, but maybe also a bit less strong. So let's go with 75%. Okay, so that gives us a nice smooth result. But if we go in the garage shading lines, you can see we have a lot of polygons. This is okay for me for just this single file. But if you have a lot more stuff going on, this may become a bit heavy. So what you could do optionally is going in the volume measure and setting this adaptive value to something like just even 1%, and that gets rid of a lot of polygons. But you can push this as far as you want. But you will also notice we get some of these not so nice looking polygons. So I'm just going to keep it at 0 because my computer can handle it right now. Okay, so that's already the basic part of the model. Now we're just going to add some more details before we jump into the texture and the lighting. So the detail we're going to add are just some shattering pieces all over the place. There are many ways you can create these shattered pieces, but what I found to be the easiest way is just making some fractured objects. So to do this, I'm just going to create a new document, just because that's a bit cleaner. Create a new sphere, and we're going to put this inside of a Voronoi fracture. The easiest way to get this is just pressing Shift and C and searching for it, and double click. We're going to put the sphere inside of it, and you will get this patchy look. So every color is a single piece. It's even more clear if you offset the fragments in here. So something like this. Doesn't really matter which value you pick right now. So you can see we have a lot of pieces that will become the shattered pieces. So we can go even further and go to this Sources tab in the point generator. And down here we have the point amount, which I'm going to bump up just a bit to maybe 40 of them. So that it gives us 40 unique pieces we can put around there, which is probably better than the same 4 or 5 ones every time. So when that is set up, make sure you have the Voronoi fracture selected and press C to make this editable. That gives us all these 40 parts inside of there. And we're just going to copy this to the original document. So we can paste this in here already. But of course right now this is way too large, so we're going to scale this down, maybe to something like 10% of the original. Now to scatter these around, we're going to use a cloner first. So get that. And we're going to drag all the children inside of there. So not the group of Voronoi fracture, but only the sphere parts. And we can get rid of the group. Let's also set the mode to object. And we're going to use a placeholder for this. So that will be another sphere. But we're going to make this one a bit bigger. So maybe something like 175 centimeters, like this. But we can also hide it. And we're going to link the cloner with the sphere. Let's also set the instance mode to multi-instance. That makes it a bit softer on the computer for the calculations when we add a lot of clones, which is also what we are going to do. So let's change this from 20 to 150 clones. So right now this is a bit too uniform. You can really see the sphere where it is being cloned on. So with the cloner still selected, we're going to add a random effector and go in the parameter tab. The 50 centimeter position is just fine. But we're also going to play with the scale. We're going to enable the uniform scale and the absolute scale, so that only scales everything in one uniform way. And we're going to set this to maybe minus 0.96. So that means that everything only gets smaller and never bigger, because the chunks are already quite big. Okay, so that looks better. For the next part we will be starting to use Octane, because we will be adding a lot of clones. You could use the cloner, but because it's so many of them, it will probably get a bit unstable, and it's just a bit easier to work with the scatter, because we are in Octane anyway. So you could drag out the live viewer, and maybe set it up to be the side view in the viewport. And the first thing we're going to do is creating the Octane scatter. I'm just going to copy the contents of this cloner and put it inside of the scatter. You could use instances, but because it's so many of them, I'm just going to copy them. It's not that it's very heavy on the polygons. So maybe I can already start the render view, like this. And let's go to the Octane Scatter its settings. So first of all, we need to set the distribution to surface. And we're just going to use the volume measure. So drag that inside of there. And you can already see it is being scattered on top of there, but it doesn't look that good right now. So we're going to make some adjustments. So the first thing I notice is that it's sinking in the surface a bit. So we can change that with this position tab. And we have the X, Y, and Z values. The Y value in the center is the one that calculates the height, so that's what we need. So let's just raise this up something like 2 centimeters. Another thing that's not right now is the scale of all of this. So you're going inside of here and you're going to set a uniform scale. That means that we don't need to change the 3 values, but just one of them. So maybe let's go with 0.3 of them. I'm also going to use just 1,000 of them. So that's the default, that's fine. And one last thing we can do to give this a bit more randomness is adding some noise in the shader of the scale. So that just gives us very small speckles, but maybe we can make this a bit larger to see a bit more of it because of the noise that is scaling it down. So I'm just going to stick with 0.4 for this. Okay, for the next scatter I'm just going to make a duplicate of this one, so we have the same contents. But I'm going to project this not on the volume measure, but on this placeholder sphere. I don't need that many of them, so I'm just going to stick with 400 of them. But for the position, I'm also going to make some adjustments to make this a lot more random. So I'm going with -50 and -60 and -50 again. So that puts it a bit closer to the original sphere instead of this large placeholder. I'm also going to use a noise for the position this time. So let's add that in the shader. Let's make this a lot smaller, maybe 10%. And we're also going to increase the contrast of this to something close to 60%. Let's go back, and I'm also going to change this noise on the scaling. So maybe let's use a different one so it's not too uniform. Maybe the turbulence. We're going to make this one larger, 150%. And also increase the contrast to maybe something like 75%. So I know these are a lot of random values, but it's just something you need to try out and see what works for you. But I already figured out what was nice, so I'm just going to skip searching through them and just give you the values, of course. So let's see what happens if we put a normal scale to this. Okay, so we can rescale this however we like. So I'm going to keep this pretty small again. Okay, so in the finished result, you may have noticed that we have a lot of scattering happening at the side here. So let's create that. So I'm going to copy this one once more, just for the contents. We're going to set this to the volume measure again. And we're also going to increase the amount of this. Maybe something like 3,700, not too many of them. The position needs to be changed, of course. So let's go with 0 and 26 and 0. So that puts them above the sphere instead of inside of it. But we can also remove the noise for this one, so let's clear that. But for the scale we will keep it, but maybe make it a bit larger. Maybe like that, just for now. And I'm also going to add an effector to this, so maybe the random effector. The position can stay as it is, and we're also going to add 360 degrees rotation on all axes. But just creating the effector doesn't apply to the scatter, so we need to go to the scatter and open the effectors tab and drag it inside of there. Okay, so that gives us the result a bit more, but right now it is happening all over the place, so we need to limit that to just the right side. So what I did is creating a plane effector, disable the position value and enable a scale value, but uniform and absolute scale selected, and set this to -1. So that basically makes it invisible. So we're going to apply that to the scatter as well, like this. But that means it hides them all, which we don't want. So let's go back to the plane effector and set up a fall off. This one can be anything you like, but I'm going to use the cone field. So the defaults should be kind of fine, but let's go in remapping. And we're going to set the inner offset to 100%. And now we can rotate this like so, to kind of put it out there, like this. but right now it's hiding what's inside of it, so we don't want that. So let's go to the remapping again and check this invert option, like so. So you could keep adjusting whatever you want on this shape and the cone and the position, but for me this is just fine right now. Okay, so let's save and continue one last time with another scatter. I'm just going to copy this one and paste it, and I'm going to delete the plane effector. Disabling doesn't do the job. And I'm going to put a lot more of these, so maybe something like even 70,000. But of course they are way too large, so let's scale this down a lot. Maybe let's remove a 0 from this. Okay, like that, because otherwise it's a bit too much. Okay, so that's all of the scattering. Now we can continue with the material and the lights. So let's get started with the lights first. So the first thing I'm going to do is creating a texture environment. And we're going to create a gradient inside of it. Let's keep the type to 2D hue. And we will be going from a dark grayish blue to a brighter, even white looking blue. Let's also set the render mode to path tracing maybe, because we will need that for the best results, especially with the transparency which we will be using. But we can set the max samples to something way lower. I'm going with 4000 samples for now. Okay, the first and most important light I'm going to add is the backlight, so that's behind the sphere. So that will be an Octane area light. Right now you can notice this is a rectangle, but for the best results we want this to be a disk. So click on the Octane light itself, not on the tag. And let's go to the details tab, and in here we can set it to disk. We're also going to make this one larger, something like 600 by 600. And of course we need to adjust the position. Right now this is blowing out the light because it's way too strong compared to the size of the light. So what I like to do with Octane lights is going to the distribution and setting up an fall-off map. So you can go inside of here, and this minimal value will control how much light passes the disk. So you can see right now we have some kind of gradient on there, and the higher the value, the brighter it will get. So I'm going to keep this rather low and go outside of here, and we're just going to increase the power to compensate. Okay, so this gives us a nice look of the light shining on top of there. One more thing we are going to do is making sure we don't see the light in the back here. So let's go to the visibility tab and uncheck camera visibility. One more thing you can also do is playing with the temperature. So I'm going to make this a bit colder, which means a higher value. Okay, I'm just going to copy this one, and I'm going to put this one at the bottom. So that's kind of a mirrored effect of the top one. But this one doesn't need to be as strong, so maybe 200 power. And let's also play with the fall-off map. I'm also going to make the scale of this a bit more uneven. Maybe something like this. So we have a lot of light passing at the front as well. Okay, and we're going to add one more light, which will fill the scene a bit more, so we have a bit more brightness. This can be just the simple rectangle one. But we're also going to add a fall-off map. And I'm just going to put this at the front, top here, like that. And make sure we don't see it, of course, because it's really in the way. So that's the basic lighting setup. I think it looks nice right now. Okay, let's continue with the material. There is not that much to it. So let's go to the material manager and click on create. In this case, for me, it's extensions, Cinema 4D, Octane. And we just need the default Octane material. Let's open this up, and we're just going to set this to specular, and we can already apply this to basically all the parts. Okay, so by default this doesn't look right straight away, especially with the lights, so we're going to adjust that. First of all, we need a bit of roughness, because right now it's kind of like glass or water, so let's add the tiniest bit of roughness. Okay, I'm also going to add a bit of noise on here, so it kind of breaks up the evenness of this. So just add noise, and I'm going to set this to the electric one because I think that looks nice. But it's way too big, so let's go with 25%. And you can see it totally looks different right now. But I'm also going to adjust the mix of this to be something like in the middle, so we have the original float color and the noise combined. I'm going to right click and copy this texture and go to the bump map and just paste it in here so it kind of copies that shape. So if we zoom in, you should be able to notice we have a bit of texture going on that is copying the roughness. So that's good. Let's also go to the index. Maybe we can bump this up to 1.5. Doesn't really matter that much because it's a small difference. Maybe also in the bump we can increase the strength of this by adding some more contrast to the noise. So let's go with 60%. That makes it way rougher and also more obvious. And also you can notice the performance of the graphics card right now, because it kind of looks great almost instantly, which is nice because this is quite heavy to render. Okay, one more thing we can do is playing with the transmission, its color. So I'm just going to make this a bit more blue. You usually have to stay very close to white because it's quite obvious when you do this. You can already see how much bluer this is with just a very small adjustment in the color. And now finally, for the subsurface scattering, let's go to medium and we're going to add the scattering. Let's go inside of here. This kind of looks cool too, but not what we want. That's because we have a lot of density to this. So let's change this to 2. The volume step length can stay as it is. For the absorption, we're going to add an RGB spectrum. So that's just a difficult word for color. And we're going to do the same kind of thing as we did with the transmission, which is some kind of soft blue, very close to white. Like this. That kind of changes the overall color again. For the scattering, I'm just going to use a black color. It's not that much of a difference, but I just like to have it in there. And with that, everything should be set up with the material for now. It doesn't look like the materials apply to the scatters, so the easiest way probably is to just make a search for the title here, so sphere fracture. So click this button to search and type in sphere underscore fracture, and I'm going to select everything that comes up in the searches, right click on the material and click apply. So now you can see we have them on here, which is nice. Make sure you press the X right here and then we can close this search bar. Okay, one more thing I had in the original is an emitting light at the center here, so let's create that. That's just a sphere, but way smaller, something like 28 centimeters. And we're going to create a new octane material. This one can stay at diffuse, so we can use the emission. Let's just use the black body emission. Go inside of that. We don't need it to be that strong, so let's go with 53 power. And we're going to adjust the temperature of this. You could use anything you want, but I want this to be warm, so that means a lower value. So with this you can really see the subsurface scattering and all the bump mapping that's happening, which breaks up the light. So that's cool. Another thing I'm going to do to finish this up is adding some fog to this. So let's go to Octane Fog Volume. I'm going to make this a bit larger, maybe 700 on all directions. I'm going to make this invisible in the viewport. Let's go to medium and inside of the volume medium. And of course we don't need this to be this dense. So let's go with 0.1. And also the step length can be a bit larger. That makes it a bit easier on the computer. So let's go with 14. I'm also going in the absorption. Right now this is set to gray, but I want this to be a bit more bluish gray. Let's also go to the scatter color. And I'm also going to do the same kind of bluish color. So that makes everything a bit softer and gloomy. So that's nice. But right now you can notice this is totally different from the end result, which I showed at the beginning of the video. That's because I added something else, which is a camera effect. So let's create the Octane camera and look through it. And here is where the fun begins. This is where I like to spend most of my time actually. So let's go to Camera Imager and enable the Camera Imager. And we can change the response and just scroll through it to see what kind of filter we like. There are a lot of them, but I use the Kodachrome 25, which gives us a nice contrast, but it also makes things a bit too dark, so we can compensate that with the exposure, like this. And we can also compensate with the gamma to make it a bit more contrasty, or not if you like it that way. Also a bit of vignetting. And I'm also going to increase the saturation a bit more. And now one more thing we can also do is go into the post-processing tab and enable this as well. I'm just going to increase some of the blooming and also add a lot of glare to this. Maybe blur it out a bit. And now we can make the final adjustments to get the right contrast which we want. Of course you can also keep adjusting this in Photoshop, which I actually did, so that's why it's a bit different right here. But still a nice look, I think. And we can also go in the thin lens options and disable autofocus. And we're going to set a larger aperture, so we have a depth of field. And when we click this F icon here and click on anything we want to be in focus, it will go in focus. But right now we have the volume in front of everything, so make sure you select polygon. And that also concludes the tutorial, I guess. So if you want to take a look at my original file, or this one even, we will put this up for our patrons, but we will also sell these on Gumroad if you just want this file without getting a recurring subscription. So that's all I have to share with you guys today. I hope you liked it, and I will see you in the next video.